2025 ist ein ganz besonderes Jahr. Für jemanden wie mich, nämlich einen Jane Austen-Fan, denn vor 250 Jahren wurde Jane Austen geboren. Und das gibt uns natürlich genug Anlass, um ihre Bücher und sie als Autorin zu feiern, auch hier im Podcast. Ich hatte die Gelegenheit, mit dem Jane Austen-Experten und Literaturprofessor John Mullen zu sprechen. Es ist das erste Mal, dass in diesem Podcast ein Interview auf Englisch vorkommt. Und es war für mich eine ganz besondere Freude, weil ich ein großer Fan von John Mullins Buch bin, What Matters in Jane Austen, 20 Crucial Puzzles Solved, und natürlich auch von seinen vielen Talks und Interviews, die ich euch alle in die Shownotes gepackt habe. In diesem Interview sprechen wir über Emma von Jane Austen, das angeblich ihr Hauptwerk ist und das komplexeste und interessanteste ihrer Bücher. Und weil John Mullen in vielen seiner Talks gerne Quiz-Elemente einbaut und das natürlich für Jane Austen-Nerds wie mich ein gefundenes Fressen ist, habe ich ihn auch gebeten, ob er denn ein Jane Austen-Quiz mit mir machen möchte. Das haben wir gemacht und mal schauen, wer da sozusagen am Ende gewinnt. Ich hoffe jedenfalls, ihr habt Spaß mit dieser Deep Dive-Folge. Für alle, die Jane Austen oder Emma noch nicht kennen, haben wir natürlich auch eine, Jane Austen oder Emma Light-Folge vorbereitet. Also startet vielleicht mal mit der und wenn ihr dann noch Lust habt, tiefer einzutauchen, hört in diese Folge mit John Mullen rein. Es wird hier Spoiler geben und wir reden ziemlich im Detail über Plot und über Charaktere und wer was sagt und warum das so großartig ist und warum es so viel Spaß macht. Genau, also ich freue mich jedenfalls total, dass ich dieses sehr besondere Interview anlässlich des Jane Austen Jubiläums führen durfte und ich hoffe, dass ihr auch viel Spaß damit habt.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Frauen haben immer geschrieben, auch wenn sie weniger geschrieben haben.
Annette von Roste-Hülshoff, Julia Rabinowitsch, Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Sie haben nicht so viel weniger geschrieben, wie ihr Anteil im Kanon ist.
Renate Welsch, Käthe Recheis und natürlich Christine Nöstlinger.
Wen könnte man jetzt einfach mal ersetzen mit Autorinnen?
Isabel Allende, Gioconda Belli,
Françoise Sagan.
Das ist eine ketzerische Frage vielleicht, weil mir Goethe und Schiller wirklich bei den Ohren raushängt.
So this year marks the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth, which is reason enough for us to celebrate and for us to be talking about one of her best novels, Emma, in detail. And I'm incredibly excited to be talking to John Mullen today, Professor of English at University College London. You are an expert on 18th century literature and you have written about Austen a lot and studied her a lot. And today we're going to talk about Emma. And before we sort of delve into the novel, I have prepared a couple of questions sort of to contextualize Jane Austen a bit, because even though today I still think that she compares with very few novelists, even, I always find myself reading other books and thinking, oh, it's just not as good as her books. I would love to know from you sort of what distinguishes her from her contemporaries and why she still holds up today, in your opinion?
Well, that's a very good question, because I suppose one of the privileges of being an academic like myself is I've had the chance to read quite a lot of novels by her contemporaries, because if you're an academic, you get to read the books which haven't survived necessarily, and which you have to go to libraries to look at. And I think there's one really clear lesson, which is that Jane Austen's novels have not survived and prospered and continued to dazzle people, really, because of what they're about. I mean, obviously, it's important what they're about, but there are quite a lot of novels written, particularly by women, actually, in Jane Austen's lifetime. So that's from the late 18th through the first couple of decades of the 19th century, which are about lots of the same things, which are stories of courtship and who you're going to marry, and which have a lot of the material that Jane Austen aficionados would recognize, stuff about class and inheritance and attractive men who actually can't be trusted, and wills which lend the money to leave the money to the wrong person, and women who have to make their way in their world without, you know, sufficient financial independence. And some of those novels are actually by women who on the surface are more impressive than Jane Austen. So perhaps her best known contemporary, who earned more money than Jane Austen did from novels in her lifetime, Maria Edgeworth, is a really impressive figure, and, you know, and an appropriate sort of feminist heroine. She wrote about the issues which particularly preoccupied her as a woman in Regency society, and about how women's careers and aspirations were hampered. And she was a very intellectual person, impressive in all sorts of ways. And her novels aren't bad. They're really not bad. But poor Maria Edgeworth, who actually wrote rather condescendingly about Emma, which she read and said, oh, it's not about anything interesting. In a way, all Maria Edgeworth's novels are, from a literary point of view, not worth one sentence of Jane Austen's. I mean, that's a cruel way to put it. But one way of answering your question is to say, what is it that has made Jane Austen still live so vividly? One answer is her sentences. It's not what she writes about, it's the way that she writes. Of course, her characterization, her dialogue, brilliant dialogue, her grasp of human psychology, which is, you know, up there with Shakespeare, it seems to me. But above all, her sentences. And I was just thinking, because I knew you were going to ask this question, Julia, and I was thinking, well, I should have a sentence, shouldn't I? I should offer your listeners a sentence. So can I offer a sentence that just no other novelist before Jane Austen or of her time would or could have written, although none of the words that are in it are so unusual. And it might be familiar because it comes at the end of the first chapter of Pride and Prejudice. And the first chapter, if anybody, I can't believe anybody listening to this will not have read some Jane Austen, but if anybody hasn't, just try the first chapter of Pride and Prejudice. It's 2 pages long, little more than 2 pages long. A husband and a wife who've been married a good time are talking to each other. And all you get, really, apart from a little introductory paragraph, the famous, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Then you get this dialogue between Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. And at the end of it, you sort of know their marriage. It's a sort of miraculous little vignette. And at the end of the dialogue, we kind of, as it were, go back to the narrator. And there's this wonderful sentence about Mr. Bennet. And it goes, "Mr. Bennet was so odd a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humour, reserve, and caprice, that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character." And it's such a clever sentence, isn't it? Because we understand his character, even though we've only been in his company for about a minute and a half, whereas his wife doesn't. And I remember when I first read that, I thought, this person must exist. There's never been a person like this before. There's never been a person who's been such an odd mixture for such odd things. That he must be there. I believe him already. Of course, I've already heard him talk. And, you know, it's an ordinary miracle because these are just words in the English language lying around for anybody to use. And so you could say Jane Austen's gift is for creating characters, and that would be true. But she does it through her sentences. And so it's the way she writes, which is just so extraordinary, rather than actually, you know, what people often say, oh, it's all about money, it's about sexual longing, it's about class, it's about love. Of course, all those things are true, but it's the way she writes that does it.
Mm. And I like that you've mentioned the sentences, because later on we're going to have a little quiz and look at some sentences sort of in more detail. So I'm looking forward to that as well. You have now given us an example from Pride and Prejudice. Emma, of course, is supposed to be the most complex and mature of her novels. What would you say makes this novel so special?
Well, it's the longest of her novels. And it was the fifth novel that she completed. And I suppose one slightly cheating answer to your question is that it's the novel she wrote when she was absolutely, as we say in English, I don't know if there's a German idiom to go with it, to match it, firing on all cylinders. So I think, she wrote 6 novels. I think each one of them is a kind of masterpiece. But after the first 1 or 2 novels, she seems to me to have been forging her own direction. So what other novelists had written was no longer any help to her, even reacting against it wasn't interesting anymore. So she was like the very greatest writers, very small handful, like Shakespeare or Tolstoy or Kafka. She got to the stage where she was influenced only by herself almost. And it seems to me that Emma was written at the peak of her career, where she had learned everything from her other novels, and including maybe some awkward things, some problems, challenges as a novelist that she found awkward in her early novels, and she found ways to solve them. I mean, that's a careerist sort of answer. In terms of what it's like to experience it as a reader, I would say it is the most minutely, intricately plotted and extraordinarily interconnected of all her novels. So every Jane Austen reader has the experience, I think, of rereading one of the novels. I mean, you must have done this, Julia, and you think you know it well, and you reread it, and you discover all these things you've never seen before. And that is a really singular thing about her. And with Emma, that is more the case than with any of her other novels. And I think we'll talk a bit later maybe about the technique of it, but it's got this extraordinary, it's this extraordinary novel technically, in which, although it's narrated in the third person, almost all of it, not all, but almost all of it is from the point of view of Emma, the main character, the heroine, who is wrong about almost everything. And that's an extraordinary achievement, that the world is seen through her eyes, but without any author, as it were, intervening to tell us what she's getting wrong. And I don't know if any of your listeners will have read any George Eliot, for instance, but a wonderful later 19th century novelist who very much admired Jane Austen. And in a George Eliot novel, George Eliot's, as it were, there helping us see how certain characters have a limited or distorted view of the world. But the great thing about a Jane Austen novel, at least when she's at her best, and I would say throughout Emma, is that, as Virginia Woolf said about her, she's not there at all. She's just not there. She's created characters and so completely, and a narrative voice that is so influenced by her characters that the author isn't there to help us. And it's a wonderful sort of tax on our ingenuity as readers, but I think very exciting that we have to work it all out for ourselves, and never more than in the case of Emma.
Yeah, it happens really almost every time you read it. It happened to me today that I noticed things that when I was just reading a couple of sentences, I started again noticing things that I had never seen before. So just what you were saying. Before we come on to what you've just started to talk about, which is the technical sort of narrative technique of the novel. I'm just going to very briefly tell our listeners who haven't read the novel what it's about. I'm going to give a couple of spoilers because I think we have to talk about everything. So the novel is about Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, as we're told at the beginning. And the novel starts really with her close friend and former governess, Miss Taylor, who gets married and therefore leaves Emma, and kind of creates a vacuum in Emma's life. And she starts looking for a new friend and for a new hobby, and she settles on Harriet Smith, who's a very sweet and simple, but also, as you have often said, very stupid young girl, and on her new hobby, which is matchmaking. And she thinks that she can pair off kind of everyone in her acquaintance, but she herself doesn't see that, first of all, she's wrong, as you've said, and also she doesn't see who she herself is destined to marry, which is Mr. Knightley, is an old family friend, and the only person who really is kind of on her level, kind of challenges her and stands up to her. So that just to briefly sets the scene for what we're going to talk about. You have said that Emma is very special in this narrative technique, and that very particular style is called free and direct style. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
I think in the novel in English, Jane Austen more or less invented this technique. She didn't have a name for it, but we have this name. But actually, the name we have for it dates from the early 20th century, and it was used by other great novelists of the 19th century. Who also didn't have a name for it, and it was used by Flaubert, for instance, brilliantly, and it was used by Henry James and writers like this. Although often they didn't quite know where it came from. And it's a technique whereby one says in the third person, i.e. of a character, he did this, she did that. One says things about them, but one allows the narration to be filtered through their consciousness. So, I mean, Jane Austen was using it from the first, in her first published novel, at least, Sense and Sensibility, already is using it. But it's used in Pride and Prejudice and Mansfield Park, her subsequent novels. But it's, as it were, at its peak in Emma. And it's used because it's used also in this extraordinarily sophisticated way to sort of fool the reader in a way. And I thought the easiest way to describe it might be not to describe it, but to give a little example. And it's an example that chimes with your excellent description of what goes on in the novel. I was worried when you said spoiler, you didn't name him, but there's this smooth young vicar, clergyman in the village called Mr. Elton, who is, there's a wonderful phrase. I think it's, he's living alone and not much liking it. Mm. He, like Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice, is, or Mr. Bingley in Pride and Prejudice, is in want of a wife. The first volume of the novel is mostly taken up with what Emma thinks is Mr. Elton's courtship of Harriet. But I think the reader totally knows, without having seen the film or anything, that Mr. Elton is obviously interested in Emma, not Harriet. And part of the comedy, but also a slightly painful comedy sometimes of the first volume, is watching Emma deludedly matchmaking Mr. Elton and Harriet, when in fact, it's obvious really what Mr. Elton's after. And I don't know what you think, but I'm sure you must remember when you first read Emma, you did know, didn't you, that from the first that Mr. Elton couldn't be interested in Harriet.
I think I saw the film first, so that's a problem.
Yeah. That's a pity, really, because it's much cruder in the film version. Whereas, of course, in the novel, all you've got is the evidence of the dialogue and and most of the narration is all wrong because it's from the point of view of Emma. Anyway, it's a long introduction. I'll give you a little example. So Emma is trying to contrive an excuse, first of all, to get inside Mr. Elton's house because she wants to have a look, but also to get Mr. Elton and Harriet together alone because he's always with her, with Harriet and Emma. And they go out walking, they bump into Mr. Elton, and Emma breaks a lace in her boot just as they near Mr. Elton's house. So they have to go into his house to have her lace mended. And she goes off with the housekeeper to fix her boot, leaving Mr. Elton and Harriet alone together in the drawing room. And Emma actually thinks not only will this give him a chance to sort of, get familiar, but actually she thinks that he's going to pop the question and propose. And then you get this sentence, okay? The boot is fixed. Emma comes back into the room. The lovers were standing together at one of the windows. It had a most favorable aspect, and for half a minute, Emma felt the glory of having schemed successfully, but it would not do. He had not come to the point. He had been most agreeable, most delightful. He told Harriet that he'd seen them go by and had purposely followed them. Other little gallantries and allusions had been dropped, but nothing serious. Now, actually, there's all sorts going on there, but just take that first little sentence. The lovers were standing together at one of the windows. Really easy sentence to write, but until Jane Austen wrote it, nobody would have written that sentence. Because, of course, the point is they're not lovers at all. In fact, it will turn out, spoiler alert, later on, that Mr. Elton has contempt for Harriet. He despises her. And he's only being nicey nice to her in order to suck up to Emma. The lovers were standing together at one of the windows is Emma's sentence. It's not Jane Austen's sentence. But of course, it's not the lovers are standing at one of the windows, thought Emma. That's or the two characters whom Emma thought of as lovers were standing. It just tells you it as though it's a fact. Mm. And the whole novel's like that, or almost the whole novel's like that. And a lot of Jane Austen's other novels like that. And, there are, in all Jane Austen's novels, you can find the example of sentences which state as facts things which are completely untrue. There's a wonderful one in Persuasion, her last novel, where about Captain Wentworth, Anne Elliot loves Captain Wentworth, who once proposed to her. She rejects him. Then he comes back 8 years later, and it tells us about him. And it says, the subject of Anne Elliot comes up, and it says, her power with him was gone forever. And it's completely untrue. It's him thinking, her power with me is gone forever. I'm not interested in her anymore. But it's completely untrue. And, it's simple, isn't it? It's really simple. And yet it's really complicated. And that's what Jane Austen's novels are like. They're really simple and they're really complicated.
It's so funny because Emma, she seems so close to the truth a lot of the time. It's like she's almost hitting it, but she's not. And it's really, there's a lot of dramatic irony for the reader to think, she almost got there. There's one chapter which, when I was reading it this time around, really struck me. I had kind of forgotten about it. It's in the third volume, chapter 5, which is narrated almost entirely from the perspective of sort of Mr. Knightley. I was completely struck by it. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yes, it's really extraordinary. I mean, there are 2 chapters, essentially, in the whole novel, which are not from Emma's point of view. And one is very early on in the novel, I think it's chapter 3, where Emma is actually not even present. Mm. And that is but that is almost all dialogue between Mr. Knightley and Mrs. Weston, Emma's former governess and companion. So it's not exactly from Mr. Knightley's point of view. It's us overhearing what these 2 characters say about her. And then she's present and dominant for the whole novel until, yes, very late on, there's this extraordinary chapter 5, and I mean, of volume 3. And I mean, I'm just certain Jane Austen must have thought really hard about doing this because her method is so consistent throughout. And it's a very artful, complicated chapter where all sorts of truths are revealed and hidden. You know that it's been thought about very hard because it's contained within the chapter. Absolutely. So the whole chapter is from Mr. Knightley's point of view. And then we go back. We go back to Emma. It's as if Jane Austen knew that in order to make you really conscious of how Emma-centered your perception had become, she had to give you a little breathing space so that you suddenly realized not necessarily what was going on, but how Emma-centered you'd become as a reader.
I was really actually quite sorry to leave Mr. Knightley kind of as a narrator or the kind of as a focal character, because he seems very sort of, what I noticed was that he was very much aware of the things that he didn't know and very much aware of his own limited sort of perception, or the limitations of what he could see and hear, and also what Emma and other characters could see and hear. Whereas Emma always thinks that she understands everything perfectly.
Yes, you're right. He's a little more modest. But also at the same time, though, I would say that one of the interesting things about that chapter is Mr. Knightley. I mean, he's a very perceptive guy, but he too is biased. He too has his prejudices. And, you know, this Frank Churchill guy turns up and activates Mr. Knightley's jealousy because Emma's so interested in him. And Mr. Knightley gets flustered sometimes and loses his temper sometimes. And it's always to do with Frank Churchill. And it's not, you know, Jane Austen is too wonderful a novelist to have any of her characters in this novel, as it were, simply knowing the truth or being sort of entirely trustworthy, because Mr. Knightley, even in that chapter, is motivated partly by his own sort of angry irritation at Frank Churchill's sort of charm. He really is suspicious of his charm. He's right to be suspicious of his charm, isn't he? But at the same time, his suspicions have their own selfish motives. Yeah. And I know what you mean when you say you were sorry to leave him. All I would say is, you know, I think Mr. Knightley is a brilliant creation, and one of the, you know, very few novelists are good enough to do this. One of the ways in which we get a sense of Mr. Knightley is through Emma's responses to him. So even though we don't have, as it were, direct access to him, we get Emma's responses to him. And somebody once said to me, is Emma ever right about anything? And the answer is yes, she's right about Mr. Knightley. She never, you know, and there's an extraordinary moment where, and Mr. Knightley sort of has an effect on her of making her sometimes half see the truth. And she never deludes herself about him. And she's never wrong about him.
I was also thinking when reading that chapter from Mr. Knightley's perspective that he would be like a great detective, you know, like in a crime novel, and that Jane Austen would have been a great writer of crime novels, perhaps. Like it all seems very sinister, and Frank Churchill like the villain. So it's very fun.
And again, without spoiling the plot,
yeah,
there is a hidden plot in Emma to do with Frank Churchill.
Yeah.
which the first time reader, if they haven't seen the film, is unlikely to spot, but there are lots and lots of clues to it. And one of the pleasures of rereading Emma is seeing all the clues that you missed. And it is like a bit like a detective novel, even down to the fact that, I mean, we haven't mentioned that there's a wonderful cast of secondary, largely comic characters. And quite often it's the comic characters, especially and particularly to Emma, exasperating garrulous character called Miss Bates, who actually give away lots of the clues as to what's really going on, but without meaning to, you know. And that's a bit like, you know, how in a detective novel, quite often it will be some remark, but that some servant makes. Funny that. I thought I'd put the lawnmower away, you know. And
You'd only have to interview her to find out everything you want to know. I have thought about playing a little game, if you don't mind, in this interview, because one of the funny things about, or the great things about Jane Austen's novels is that her characters have very distinct ways of speaking. And I thought, in order to kind of show that or test that, if it really is the case, you know, that you can really tell Jane Austen characters just from their utterances, like each of us has selected 3 utterances, and we're going to quiz each other and try to find out who says it in the novel. Would you like to start, or shall I start?
You start.
Okay.
You. Oh no,
Okay.
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Okay, my first one is, I love to look at her.
Okay, I know who that is, and I know where it is.
Of course.
Praise the Lord. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure I know it because I recognise his. I think the word literary critics use is idiolect, a way of speaking that's true, that's distinctive to a particular person. But I believe it's. No, hang on. Is it Mr. Knightley?
Yes.
Talking about Emma in that 3rd chapter where he's talking to Mrs. Weston, talking about Emma, and Mrs. Weston is saying how beautiful she is, you know, and Mr. Knightley says, I love to look at her. And it's quite, I mean, why did you choose that one?
I chose it because I thought it was interesting that at the beginning of the novel, where Mr. Knightley really is not seeing Emma as a romantic prospect, and neither is she seeing him as one, there is this really like tiny little hint that, you know, I mean, looking at someone and to say, I love to look at her, it sounds like something very, you know, almost close to admiring her. And I mean, Mrs. Weston really has to poke him to make him say it. But once he says it, it kind of, yeah, it sounds very much like there is somewhere in the back of his mind, perhaps something that tells us already.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because it's like a double bluff on Jane Austen's part. Because if a man says that, and remember, Mr. Knightley is about 16 or 17 years older than Emma. If a man says that, it usually must mean he's either declaring his passion, which he obviously isn't, or he's innocent. I mean, his interest in the woman is so innocent that he can say it.
Exactly. You know? Yeah.
So it is a clever. It's a double bluff, and I'm sort of Mr. Knightley almost fooling himself, because, as you say, one of the brilliant things about the novel, what a love story. It's a love story about 2 people, neither of whom understands their own feelings. And so neither of them recognizes that they are in love with each other. And yet the reader is allowed to see this, though the characters can't. Very subtle. But, you know, that quote is followed by very soon after, but by one of my favorite Mr. Knightley quotes about Emma, where he says, having said, you know, have acknowledged she's beautiful and he loves to look at her, he says, and you know, and one thing I'll say about her, he says, is she's not personally vain. She's not vain about her looks, even though she's so good looking. And then he goes, as if he's saying it almost to himself, no, her vanity lies another way.
Would you like to give me one of yours? Shall we like take turns?
Okay, fine. Here is my first one, is a real tricky one.
Oh, no.
Not that it was such a very old petticoat either, for still it would last a great while, and indeed she must thankfully say their petticoats were all very strong.
Okay, I have the first guess, and I'm just going to go with it. Is it Miss Bates, or is that the trick part of
That's
the question?
trick part of it.
Oh,
So
no, okay.
No, you're very good, Julia, because you're good enough to guess that to fall into the trap. You've got to be quite good. Yeah, it's a mimicry of Miss Bates by Emma. Emma is talking to Mrs. Weston, and she says, she goes into Miss Bates speak, And Mrs. Weston goes, "Oh, stop, don't. No, stop. You're such a good mimic."
I remember that there is one bit where Emma says, can you imagine Miss Bates talking to Mr. Knightley when, supposedly he marries Jane Fairfax, and then she talks to him about her mother's old petticoats. So I did sort of fall into the trap there. But I love how, it kind of, it works because she's imitating Miss Bates. I also have a bit of a tricky one for you. Let's see. It is, you are very fond of bending little minds.
Oh, that's brilliant. I don't know that one now. Okay. So I'm going to have to guess and perhaps blunder, which, as you know, is a key word in Emma. Blunder. Blunder. Is it Frank Churchill?
It is to do with Frank Churchill. You're very close. It is Emma to Mr. Knightley, but repeating something that Mr. Knightley has said when they are talking about Frank Churchill, not being sort of strong enough to stand up to his aunt. And Mr. Knightley's sort of saying, he should just, tell them that he is going to do whatever he wants and he should bend their minds, sort of their little minds. And Emma is kind of repeating what Mr. Knightley has just said and says, you are very fond of bending little minds, but for other people, it's not that easy. I think it's such an interesting one because it could also really be true of Emma. She's also fond of bending little minds, as is Mr. Knightley. And it kind of shows that, they're quite alike, actually. They are not so different, those two.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant. I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night, cold sweat about getting that one. So it's 1-1, it looks like to me.
Oh, wow, yes.
Yeah, okay. How about this? It will be nothing but pleasure, a life of pleasure.
Oh my God. Oh my God. A life of pleasure.
It will be nothing but pleasure, a life of pleasure.
I'm gonna guess because I have no idea, and I'm gonna say, is it Mrs. Elton?
Good guess. Wrong guess.
Oh, damn it.
A good guess because it's intelligent and wrong. It's actually Miss Bates. And if you think of it, as soon as you hear that, you can go, it'll be nothing but pleasure, a life of pleasure. But it's a really interesting, it's when Jane Fairfax has thinking, I'll be careful not to give things away, thinking that all her other hope is lost, Jane Fairfax has agreed to take up the post of a governess to some friends of the ghastly Mrs. Elton. And Miss Bates is telling Emma what Jane Fairfax's position will be and how great it will be. And you as a reader know, but also Emma knows, that actually it will probably be absolutely horrible. And not just really hard work, but with some really terrible people. Because if they're friends of Mrs. Elton, a woman that in life you would hide behind a pillar to avoid.
And I should have guessed it. Now I'm going to have a cold sweat myself about that one. So my last one I think is easier.
Oh yeah, this is your last one. Okay, yeah.
It's my last one, which is, the sea is very rarely of use to anybody. I'm sure it almost killed me once.
Oh, now I do know this. Yeah. The sea is rarely of any use to anybody. I mean, it has to be an idiotic character who could say such a thing. And indeed it is. It's Emma's father, Mr. Woodhouse, who is this twitching hypochondriac and just so frightened of everything.
And you have a chapter in your book about why it's so risky to go to the seaside in Jane Austen novels, that everything bad kind of happens by the seaside.
Yeah, not necessarily everything bad, I would say. I mean, but by the seaside, obviously not in the sea, but when you're on at the seaside, and in Jane Austen's day, people did go, as they would do now, to the English seaside for their holidays. Jane Austen herself did. And the normal rules are relaxed. So in this novel, without giving anything away, some of the characters are met at Weymouth, which is on the south coast of England, and all sorts of things outside before the novel begins have happened in Weymouth because people are released from their normal inhibitions. And it's quite telling at the end of the novel that we find out early on in the novel when Mr. Woodhouse and Isabella are sort of having about to have a bit of a row about the fact that she's gone to the seaside. Emma says, "Oh, let's not talk about the sea. I'll be envious because I've never been there." She's never seen the sea. She's lived a very cloistered life. And it's quite telling that at the end of the novel, she does. I think it spoils nothing to tell you that she and Mr. Knightley do find each other eventually. And they're going to go away. Their plan is to go away after they get married for, a couple of weeks by the seaside, and she's going to see the sea, as it were. And in a subtle way, not in a crude way, there's a sense that, going to the seaside is a kind of sexy thing to do, really. And that might be a bad thing or a dangerous thing, and Lydia Bennet in Pride and Prejudice runs away with Wickham because she meets him by the sea in Brighton. But it can be a good thing, it can be something that, frees you from your normal repressed existence.
Yeah, it's a wonderful sort of pattern that you have written about in your book.
I think I'm winning 2-1, aren't I?
You're definitely winning on at this.
Okay. And this is a quote. I think this is hard, actually, because I only came upon it myself quite recently. And this, I'll give you a clue. I'm going to make it a little bit of a clue. This is a character who actually says quite a lot of interesting things. You have to really press your nose against the book to notice. Okay, here we go. To do what would be most generally pleasing must be our object. If one could but tell what that would be.
Oh, God.
And I'll give you a further clue. This is a character who's speaking sincerely.
I think it is, I'm going to guess it's Mrs. Weston.
Good.
Yes. And I think it's to do around the ball at the Crown.
Ausgezeichnet.
Thank you.
That is very good, Julia. That shows real, because you didn't recognize it. Did you recognize it?
I remember, I've been trying to prepare for this interview, so I've been listening to the audiobook as well. And I remember that they were talking about, how can we make it like perfect for everyone, this ball? And so, yeah.
It's quite a good little epitome of Mrs. Weston, isn't it? She wants to make everybody happy. And there's something very funny about it, because Mrs. Weston is an intelligent and a good-hearted character. But at the same time, you catch a sense in sometimes when she's speaking of, her efforts to make everything okay are doomed, because in life you can't make everything okay. You make it okay for one person, then it's definitely not okay for another.
Well, we're almost out of time. So the last question I'm going to ask you is, because you have sort of written about 20 puzzles in your book, is there a puzzle that you haven't solved or one that you would still like to solve about Jane Austen?
Okay. Well, I suppose I wouldn't say there are ones I haven't solved, because I think the point about the puzzles is Jane Austen plays fair by the reader, rather like a good detective fiction writer. So she sets sort of little puzzles, but she gives you enough in the novels to work out what the answers, what the solutions are, and that's very satisfying. So I don't think so. By definition, the puzzles are always, as it were, solvable. And they're not mine, they're hers, I think. So, I would just hasten to say that sort of the ingenuity is all hers. And, one of the great things about reading her is trying to sort of match up to that. You don't have to invent clever things yourself to say, as it were. So I'm not sure there are any sort of unsolved puzzles, although there are lots of, I'm sure there's plenty that I haven't yet noticed. Yes. So anyway, so I mean, yeah, so that's a bit of an evasion. But I mean, all I would say is I wrote this book with these 20 questions. I don't know whether it's good or bad news, but I've definitely got the material for another one, you know.
That's good news to us, at least.
Shall I give one to your readers?
Please do.
I'm going to be really helpful here because I'm going to tell them that it is in Emma. So that cuts down, right? So one of the things that happens in all films of Jane Austen, film adaptations and TV, which never happens in the novels, is that the hero and heroine kiss passionately. Often, as always after the proposal has been accepted, and sometimes, as in the famous BBC Pride and Prejudice, as they ride away in the carriage from the wedding. And it's as if the film adapters think that the readers will be furious if they don't see that kiss. But of course, we never see this in the novels. The only kisses are of people's hands. And funnily enough, those are never the hero and the heroine. They're always other people, you know. Elizabeth lets Mr. Wickham kiss her hand, but Mr. Darcy doesn't. So whereabouts in Emma is there between two characters, but I'm not saying who they are. Alarm bells. I'm not saying who they are. Two characters, a man and a woman, who are not married to each other, I think have a secret and passionate embrace and what we would call in England a snog. But you've got to be really clever to see it. Whereabouts does it happen?
It's a wonderful puzzle to leave with. So yeah, thank you so much, John Mullen, for this very enjoyable conversation. Of course, I have 50 more questions left, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. It is always the case with Jane Austen that you have so much more to say than you have time for. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much. It's very enjoyable for me too. And to have a questioner who is so, as my daughter would say, on it. So on it.
Great. I'm very happy. It's a great compliment to me as well. So thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Das war Die Buch, der feministische Buchpodcast.
Werde Teil unserer Die Buch-Community unter steadyhq.com/diebuchpodcast.
Folgt uns gerne auf Social Media, zum Beispiel auf Instagram unter die_Buch und schreibt uns ein E-Mail an plaudern@diebuch.at.
Wenn euch diese Folge gefallen hat, hinterlasst uns eine Bewertung auf eurer Podcast-App.
Alle Informationen findet ihr auch auf unserer Webseite www.diebuch.at.
Wir bedanken uns außerdem bei der Zirkusband, die uns ihre tolle Musik zur Verfügung stellt.